The comments and statements made within the show are the opinions of the commentators and their guests, have not been evaluated by the FDA, and are in no way attempt to diagnose, treat, mitigate, cure, or prevent any disease or illness. The contents of the show are not to be construed as medical advice. If you have a health condition or health concern, please contact a licensed, qualified healthcare practitioner.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nan.
And I'm Tom. And this is a Supplement Super Sleuth.
That'll be me. And the Herbal Storyteller.
And that definitely would be me. And together, we're going to take a peek behind the curtain of the natural products industry.
We'll be sharing naturals in the news, dispelling lots of myths, interviewing key players in the industry, and highlighting our favorite herbs and supplements.
So with that, let's pull back that curtain and see what's there.
Hey there, Tom.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. How are we doing today?
I'm good. Having one of those chilled out Friday mornings.
That's good. Well, that's why that's why we bring on our music, to help us get out of that sort of chilled out state, and we can go into a discussing type state.
Discussing or disgusting?
Discussing, yes. We're going to be discussing today.
That's excellent.
Classic. Just as long as you leave out the T, everything is fine.
Funny, very, very funny.
What do we have in the news?
Oh,
I know
naturals
you
in
got
the
some
news.
stuff you've got some stuff that you're really excited about.
Oh, I'm excited. I just, sometimes I love these headlines, and they come from all over the place. These happen to come from the American Botanical Council, which I love. I love reading their newsletter. It's just chock full of stuff, right? So, but this one, I was sideways laughing on this one because, of course, the last episode I had one where I was just absolutely tickled pink. But this one is really, really funny. Ready for this?
All right, lay it on us.
All right. The ancient Peruvian Empire put hallucinogenics in beer for political reasons. So this was published in Science Alert, January 15th, 2022. A recent archaeological find has provided evidence that the Wari, W-A-R, Wari civilization of Peru, may have used a hallucinogenic brew made from the seeds of the vilca plant mixed with an alcoholic drink known as chicha to win over, and it says that in quotations, win over the regions they were expanding into. Oh my God, can you imagine?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, we would like to have a council with you, but first you must drink this ceremonial beverage.
Oh, free. Okay. Right? It's almost as bad as the Roman bread and circus, right? Bread and circus, right? When they
bread
just
exactly.
let's give you a little bread, a little wine, and grease them up a little bit. Wow. Can you imagine? Imagine you're just tripping. You're absolutely tripping. And then some political leader comes out and you're like, all hail the chief, right? Everyone.
There you go. Wow, what an experience. Now, I guess.
Be careful of the public water.
We have to be careful where we broadcast this, because we really don't want, Congress has got enough problems.
Oh my God. But I love it, don't you?
It gives me images of, the Senate floor, people dancing with each other who were formerly terrible enemies. Mitch McConnell wearing a tutu or something, I don't know, whatever.
Let's have a love-in. And oh my God, what a concept, right? But, right, no controls. Let's just see what we can do. Oh, God.
Opening the portals of consciousness. There you go.
Absolutely.
Well, I've got one because I'm going to be talking about these in a little bit here.
Oh,
but
cool.
This is a really nice little study on dried goji berries that may provide protection against age-related vision loss. And this one came from Science Daily. It was January 13th of 2022. And just to sum it up, the results of a new study of associated consuming goji berries 5 times a week for 90 days with a buildup of the protective pigments lutein and zeaxanthin in the eyes of a group of 13 subjects aged 45 to 65 years of an age. And it's an effect that could impede age-related macular degeneration. So it's really, being in an age group that even makes those guys look young, it's something that for me is very fascinating. And like I said, we'll talk about it a little bit later because it's going to be my favorite thing today.
Goji. I love it. Yeah, cool. Great. Okay, another headline. Headline number 3. Recent study shows that the combination of tamarind seed and turmeric rhizome extracts may alleviate knee pain and support joint function. And this is from Nutritional Outlook, January 26, 2022. Data from a new double-blind placebo-controlled study have linked supplementing with Tamiflex, a proprietary combination of these extracts from tamarind seed and turmeric rhizome, with a decrease of pain, inflammation, and cartilage degradation in a group of 90 subjects experiencing mild to moderate osteoarthritis of the knee. I love this study. I mean, again, we're really exploring here. It's early. It's a small group. 90 subjects is good. That's a good amount of people. What's interesting is sometimes people will take glucosamine and chondroitin, nothing, right? And sometimes people will take curcumin or turmeric, and sometimes they'll start burping a lot, or they'll feel really dry, or they might get a tiny bit like their stool gets a little dried out, or they might notice that they feel a little warm when they take it. Especially women in menopausal years will take curcumin or turmeric, and they'll start hot flushing more. What's really nice about the combination of tamarind seed is moistening, cooling, nutritive, and you mix that with turmeric, which is dry and hot, and it's a little bit more balanced. So this is a really nice combination. Great idea. So we'll keep our eyes on that and see how that goes in the future.
Yeah, and that's something that I always like talking with you about, Nan, is because of the fact that you have such a basis in, Chinese or herbal traditions and so on. You're looking at things from a different perspective. You're looking at them from, what kind of heat do they create in the body? Are they cooling? Are they warming? Are they making things too hot? If they're making things too hot, are they making things too dry? Yeah. So it's a lot to think about in the idea of creating a really wonderful product. And I've got one here, so, being that I do train for a mushroom company right now, I'm working with a very well-known company in the industry. And this is a study that finds mushroom species ameliorates gout symptoms. And this is from Natural Ingredients, USA. It was January 28th of 2022. And it's a new study performed in rats. Lucky rats, they get to have all of the fun, right? Has associated supplementation with Philinus igniarius, which is a shelf fungus. And it's a fungus that was used traditionally by Native Americans and also in traditional Chinese medicine. And it's been associated with a reduction in the inflammation and the joint swelling that's associated with gout-induced arthritis.
Gout's a sticky wicket, right?
Yeah, gout is really difficult.
Because lots of times with gout, it's about removing things out of the diet. Red wine, shellfish. There are some things that really activate gout. And it's terrible. Your feet hurt so bad. Your toes, especially big toe, gets all swollen. I've seen, I've had clients come in and the gout is so bad. It's their toes, their knees, their whole
all the way
lower
up
leg.
their leg, up their knee.
Yeah, it can be really, really, really bad. And there are medicines, there are pharmaceuticals for gout now. And so, sometimes people take them, they really work well, but it's really nice to know that there's natural remedies. I mean, you mentioned yesterday, we were kind of talking about this, was tart cherry. And that does work if it's really mild and you're willing to take everything that aggravates you out of the diet. It can work. Yeah. But it's nice to know that there's what we call an edible mushroom, because some people are really afraid of mushrooms, but
well, it's again, you're going to be doing an extract. It's not like an edible mushroom. This is one of those mushrooms that grows out of the side of a tree, a lot of times willows and things like that are really hard, looks like a horse's hoof.
But it's not poisonous. It's not a poisonous
Not poisonous.
mushroom.
No, it's one of those mushrooms you can eat more than once.
Right. And it's not psychedelic, so yeah.
No, it's not psychedelic.
Right.
But here's what's interesting about it. There's a lot of study around the fact that it could have been actually included in the first Thanksgiving dinner.
Huh.
But what was interesting is that the Native Americans at that time, and there was a lot of use of this particular mushroom because it would be burned into an ash. and then mixed with other herbs because it has an alkaline activity to it. And so, in similar to the way that Peruvians and Incans would use ash and lime to chew with coca leaves to bring out the activity of the alkaloids in the coca leaves, there are some people who think that the Native Americans would have used this to bring out the alkaloids in tobacco.
Oh,
And make the tobacco a stronger experience.
nice.
And they've now found ethnobotanists have now found it's been used in Alaska. It's been used all over, and a lot of times it starts getting used with the introduction of something like tobacco. So it has a potentiating effect for some activities. Very interesting mushroom.
Yeah, encyclopedic knowledge of mushrooms, Tom, after many years at the knee of Paul Stamets. So, and our next headline, our fifth headline, American Botanical Council and APA and NCNPR, we'll talk about that in a second. Botanical Adulterants Prevention Program publishes a bulletin on the adulteration of eleuthera root and extracts. So we're going to really get into this, and Tom's going to talk more about it, but sometimes there's confusion in the vernacular names of the strains and the species, and that can cause problems with adulteration. We'll talk about what adulteration is, and that can be considered for the main reason for the adulteration of eleuthera root. But there are a lot of reasons why an herb, the wrong herb might get used or sold in the commercial marketplace as the authentic herb. So I'm going to let Tom kind of go into this a little bit more, since he is the herbal storyteller.
Well, part of the real problem sometimes with herbal identification, especially if you're using herbs from other countries, is the fact that there are very common names. The common names that are used in the countries are very, very similar. So if you go to a different region and you say, I'd like to buy this herb, you may get something that has the same name or a very similar name, and not because it was being done to take something from you, but it was being done because people are saying, oh, well, you want that herb? Okay, here's this herb. So in the case of eleuthero, there are a number of herbs in different regions in China that have very similar names, or they're coming from similar plants, and so it can become very confusing if you don't know what you want. And what's interesting about eleuthero is that eleuthero has some. If you're using the wrong thing, if you're thinking you're using eleuthero and you're using the wrong thing, when it came to light, so to speak, was back in about 1990. There was a case in Canada that's actually it was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, JAMA, by a Canadian physician who was attending a woman who gave birth to a baby that was covered with hair. So just like the baby had grown hair all over its body, and so they called it a hirsute baby, basically because she had been consuming what she thought was Siberian ginseng. And Siberian ginseng is, at that time, was the popular name for eleuthero. And it's no longer permitted in the United States because it's not an accurate name. So even though the name remains in use in other countries, and you'll find it on the label, you'll see, they'll talk about this is eleuthero, and then somewhere a lot of times it'll refer to Siberian ginseng. But now, generally speaking, if you're looking at Siberian ginseng, you're not really looking at it. It's not really a ginseng technically, and it's also named eleuthero, Eleutherococcus sentacoccus. So when the Canadian government investigated this hairy baby and what might have caused, don't laugh, Nancy.
I can't help it. They call it the hairy baby case, but
I know.
Sometimes
the hairy baby case, right? When they investigated this, they found out that the woman was actually taking a plant that many times gets referred to in the same way in Chinese herbal tradition, which is a Paraploca sepium, and that's a very different plant, and so. Interestingly enough, that article still gets cited, and what gets blamed is not the Paraploca, but the actual Eleutherococcus, Xanthococcus, or the site, what we would now call Eleuthero, is still getting blamed for the hairy baby when it really wasn't the Siberian ginseng or literally the Eleutherococcus that was to blame.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting thing about how herbs can get a bad rap, or about how people can think that, okay, herbs are not safe, they're dangerous, and it is just like anything. You need to be careful. You need to know what you're talking about. You need to look at it. You need to make sure that you know where the source is coming from. And this is one of the things that I like with Nancy, the American Botanical Council, which, if you are into supporting something, an organization that's really amazing, become a member. Subscribe to the American Botanical Council. You get a wonderful newsletter and lots of beautiful information. Mm-hmm. Great science officers. So that Stefan Gaffner, who is their chief science officer, has made a comment about this, and he says Eleuthero root adulteration is an example of the challenges of using vernacular names in the botanical ingredient trade. So Si Wu Jia is the Chinese pinyin name for the root, the rhizome, or the stem of Eleutherococcus xanthococcus, while Wu Jia Pi is the root bark of a related Eleutherococcus species, and Chinese herbal literature refers to both of these species as Eleutherococcus, so suggesting that both can be used interchangeably,
but they're different,
making it somewhat difficult to distinguish the two related species based on their common names. So this is in a nutshell. This is why having somebody, especially if you're working with companies who are making herbal supplements, you really want to know who's their chief herbalist. Who is helping them source their materials, what's his or her background, and how do they know this? Because it can get very confusing for people.
It can. So again, another reason why we do what we do, for sure. And we really want to help people find ethical and companies, people that are selling, and people and companies that are ethical and educated and are paying attention to these kinds of things, and they're not just in it to make a huge buck. It's not really about that. Most of the people in the real natural products industry, please stand up, because we're all of us are so dedicated, and we're so wildly in love with our crazy little niche of an industry, but we are very determined that that these kinds of important discriminations in herbs happen with regularity. We are self-regulated in some ways, especially herbalists. We're all nerds. The difference, like when I put a formula together, there is a huge difference for me with Si Wu Jai and Wu Jai Pi. Those are very different herbs with different energetics used differently, right? And so that's part of my training, and part of training of clinical herbalists, that we do understand those distinctions, but also companies that make sure that they also are, make those distinctions and have those different kinds of herbs separated out. That's really important to all of us here. So.
Yeah, it's like, following a roadmap that suddenly you turn left when you should have turned right.
Sure.
So, Nan, we regularly look at a lot of clinical studies, and you've had the opportunity in some of your past positions, to organize and to oversee clinical studies. So, and if I understand what you've been telling me, in our conversations, you're setting up a new clinical study on using the use of hyperbaric oxygen and inflammatory markers. Now, you're doing this with the gentleman that we interviewed for our very first podcast, yes. Dr. Gordon Enns, yeah. Of Inflammatory Markers Laboratory. And he was like I said, he was a previous guest. We want to bring him back on later on to get more in depth into the idea of doing your analysis to see whether or not you've got chronic inflammatory markers going on in your body. And we're going to take an opportunity here. Every once in a while, we won't have a guest. It'll just be us. And so we're going to take that opportunity right now and introduce a new segment to the show that we'll be, running every once in a while. And so let's take a look at this, and we're going to see this new periodic segment called A Deep Dive into Naturals.
Yeah. deep dive into naturals. Yeah, okay, so,
You know,
yeah,
here's
fun.
the thing, man. When we're going to do a deep dive into naturals, often for this show, and just like we've just done on some of our naturals in the news, you and I will have gone through several studies in an attempt to give a very accurate picture of the herb or the supplement that we're talking about. And doing this kind of background research has been part of our way of life, literally for almost our entire adult life,
Oh, yeah.
because that's what we've chosen to do. We've chosen to be educators in the natural product industry. So each of us has over 25 years of combing through studies. And I can remember, in working with you when we were working together at Threshold, that we had, there were times when we would go down a rabbit hole and we wouldn't come back for weeks because we would be following these different studies, and it was a great deal of fun. So, as I just mentioned, I know that you've designed, you've organized, and you've even participated in some of these studies. So, I have a really valid question that I think might be very helpful to some of our listeners, and that is, what makes a good study? What is a clinical study all about, and what makes a good one?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of different studies. There are early studies that are done in vitro, and those are really just to look at early mechanism of action and, is there something here, or are there certain chemistries that they haven't separated out? And when they separate those chemistries out, what do they do in a petri dish, basically? Mm-hmm. And then if there's something going on and it looks like there's a lot of activity, they may go to animal studies, which, of course, in our industry, there's a lot of upset about that because, lots of times it's rat or mouse or rabbit, but sometimes it's larger animals. And of course, that's pretty upsetting for a lot of us in the natural products industry. A lot of us are animal lovers and earth lovers. And, we just have this whole thing about let's be conscientious. But in order, in some cases, to take things to the level of human clinical trials, sometimes it's necessary to go through an animal trial, and sometimes it isn't. So you'll see that sometimes I like looking at in vitro studies because they just kind of give you a glance at what might be coming down the pike, or how are researchers looking at things, and how are chemists looking at new compounds. So sometimes it's really great, but that doesn't really give us much information about how herbs or nutraceuticals will be working with humans, if they're safe for humans to take, and what they really do in the context of a human being. So what we like to see, we like to see human clinical, and we like to see studies with more than 30 people, although preclinical feasibility trials of 6 to 20 people help us establish if doing deeper and larger human clinical trials is a viable thing to do. So instead of doing an animal study, some people might say, hey, I know that herb has been around forever. I'll sign up for that little trial. And it might be 6 people. It might be 10 people. It might be 15 people. So that's not a bad thing to do. It's just that you can't really hang your hat on that. So we also like to see what are called double placebo clinical trials. So both groups have no idea if what they're taking is an active ingredient or an inactive ingredient. So that's what a double-blinded study means. And then we like to see studies that are longer than a day, right? We like to see a study. I know you laugh, but I hope so. Studies are really expensive to run, So we like to see studies that are more than a day or more than a week. We like to see month-long studies. In some cases, it's necessary for the study to go on longer, but the longer you go on, the more error can happen. People forget to take their things. People forget to, check in, stuff happens, and then disqualification occurs. So a month long.
So if people don't stay with the study,
right.
then that kind of blows the whole study. It's like,
right,
well, we started out with 40 people, but only 20 finished.
Right. And so that can happen because sometimes people have stomach upset, or people will literally forget to take it, and usually if it's off-site, I mean, the best are on-site, but those are wildly expensive. Like the people have to stay in the clinic for the entire time to be monitored, those are really, really expensive and really not feasible anymore, right? So, so we like to see those. We love to see clear support of the background and reason, or raison d'etre, right? The reason for studying the mechanism of action, or we really want the foundations already scientifically sound. So, for example, we're studying boswellia, which is an Ayurvedic, typically an Ayurvedic herb. But we want to know, is there a history of boswellia? Are there in vitro studies? Are there animal studies? Are there already small feasibility studies? And as we build that body, that's where we really start to see, yeah, there's something here, right? And then the other thing we really like to see is methodology. We want an airtight methodology that's duplicatable at more than one laboratory or clinic. So sometimes multi-center trials can create a tremendous groundswell of confidence, demonstrating what we call reproducibility in the methodology. And those are the big things. And let me tell you, there's a lot more. There's so much more that goes on in creating a solid clinical trial, and managing the clinical trial, and then writing it up, making sure the abstract is accurate, and then publishing. It's just a massive, massive thing to do. But
and it's, as you mentioned, it's an extremely expensive process.
oh, yeah.
And getting even more expensive, as time goes on,
Right.
especially like during the times of the pandemic here.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I like to point out to people is there are some herbs that are what you might call low-level herbs. They're not going to be herbs that everybody's going to want to use. They're have a very specific use, and that use may not be monetarily rewarding enough for anybody to want to go out and spend the money to do a clinical trial on it. So a lot of times there will be no clinical trials on a lot of really wonderful herbs.
Yeah, that's
Just
a good
because
point, Tom.
there's no monetary value, no company is going to, do the research because they want to be paid back for whatever the research they've done. So a lot of times you do have to look, like Nan mentioned a little bit earlier, you have to look at traditional use. Yes. How long has it been in traditional use, and stay within the parameters of what the tradition says. As Americans, sometimes we tend to think that if a little is great, then a lot will be even better, and I'll get over things much quicker because I'm tripling my dose. And that's not the case. So just, one of those things to remember. Yeah. And I know you've got some examples of some studies, right, Nan?
Yeah, well, I kind of want to give a couple of examples for our listeners about what might constitute a good study. I mean, some studies get published and I read them and I think to myself, gosh, they didn't even stick to their reason for doing the study. So one of them, I saw this study and I read through it and I thought, somehow I feel like they missed the mark with this. And it's interesting because if you read the headline, it's kind of exciting. Antibacterial activity of pomegranate fruit peels and arils. So a lot of, what a pomegranate is. They're the devil to get the fruit out, right? And the fruit is the pulp around the seeds, right? So, but pomegranates are big in India, especially South India, and they're part of Ayurveda. So, and in India, there's a lot of research. There's great scientists in India. My dad traveled over there many times when he was working for the United States government in analytical food chemistry, and he did a huge bunch of work over there, and he said the scientists over there are excellent. So so there's always great science coming out of India on their herbal traditions. And so pomegranate's a big one. And so this one piqued my interest. And I saw it and I thought, ooh, that's really cool. So what they posit, ooh, that's really cool. What they really posit here is that if you make a mouthwash of pomegranate seeds, that it's going to be really more beneficial to the microbiome in the oral cavities. So they say here, in the in vitro antibacterial activities of different extracts of pomegranate fruit peels and oils, we investigated an agar well diffusion and broth dilution methods against 4 food-related bacteria, so Bacillus subtilis, Staphylococcus aureus, E. coli, and Salmonella. And the solvents used as extracts in the study were hot water extracts, and then they put in ethanol and acetone, and that's how they preserve them, right? And so what they were saying was, if you use chlorhexidine, okay, which is a mouthwash that's antibacterial, if you use chlorhexidine over a long period of time, which is in most common mainstream mouthwashes, that it will cause what's called bacterial resistance. So it's like using antibiotics over and over and over and over again. The bacteria in your body become resistant to the antibiotic, and so that there's indication that also happens with chlorhexidine, which is in regular mouthwashes. So this particular study goes about putting a methodology together of making a comparative analysis between, and it was a good study. It was double-blind, placeboed. It was in clinic with ages from 18 to 59, and basically this large group of people, was more than 90 people. They split them into blinded, kind of groups. People didn't know if they were using the pomegranate mouthwash or the regular mouthwash with chlorhexidine. And what happened was the pomegranate mouthwash was suppressive to some bacteria, but not all. And the chlorhexidine was suppressive to certain bacteria, but not all. But they ran the study for 1 month. So the problem with that study is that it wasn't long enough, because bacterial resistance may not happen in a month period of time. It may take 6 months, it may take a year. So although the study didn't really find a big difference between the pomegranate mouthwash and the chlorhexidine mouthwash, both worked, but they worked differently. There was no indication of kind of preserving the intelligence of the microbiome, and no comparative analysis of what we call bacterial resistance with chlorhexidine, because they absolutely didn't run the study long enough. So that's where I kind of say that kind of fell short versus a study. Does that make sense, Tom? I mean, am I kind of just babbling on and not making any sense?
No, I'm Nancy is the supplement super sleuth, and so she goes down rabbit holes and really comes up with all of the details. And in this case, she's absolutely right, especially when you're dealing with the microbiome, whether it's in your mouth or in your gut. It's going to take a while for a study like that, and so to do it for such a short period of time almost does the concept of the study a disservice.
Right. It's because they don't really find any difference, not statistically significant. Both work a little differently, but then how do you make a decision to use one under certain circumstances and another under another circumstances? And if you want to be specific about that, right, and how long do you use it, and then when do you discontinue use? And so it's sort of like and what was the point of this anyway? So that's what I would call a weak, right? Like the study didn't stay in the context of their original argument, right? Yeah. So for me, it loses something, and I kind of just throw this study out. But okay, so there's a study that was published. I really love this study. You can find it on PubMed. It's a randomized placebo-controlled trial. The heading is curcumin and piperine. Piperine's a compound in black pepper, combination for the treatment of patients with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, double-blind, randomized placebo-controlled trial. So this is a gold standard trial. Their background was experimental and clinical studies have revealed that curcumin may be an effective therapy for non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Hence, the aim of this study was to assess the effect of curcumin plus piperine administration on NAFLD. That's the short kind of, term for non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which is a mouthful to say over and over again. So they designed a study. They put the study together. They said, we're going to use 18 people who are 18 to 65 years old, who've been diagnosed clinically with this particular liver disorder. So they don't drink a lot of alcohol, or they don't drink any alcohol, but they still have fatty liver disease, right? And they used ultrasound and blood tests. And then they designed a placebo that looked just like the others, so nobody knows what they're taking, right? All participants received dietary parameters and exercise advice, right? And then they measured them all the same way. They measured, using hepatic ultrasound. They did a baseline, and then they did at the end of the group. So the results were really interesting. 79 participants were recruited, and they were randomly allocated either placebo or curcumin and piperine. So at baseline, everyone was the same. And then after the treatment period, the curcumin and piperine group exhibited lower alkaline phosphatase and lower concentrations and severity of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease compared with the placebo group. So what that tells me is there's something there. Now I'm not going, there's no cure here. This is just like interesting. We have activity, good study. They stayed on point. They brought up a question. They wanted to uncover something. They set it up. The methodology was good. Everyone was at baseline. They used the same measurements. They had measurements that could be reproducible at other labs or clinics, and they came out with a result. Good study, solid study, something I like to see, and I would use it. I would read it and make a consideration for, curcumin with piperine. Now, I will say that.
Cite it in, yeah.
Sure. Now, there are places you can go. Like if you start to get interested about this, and I know some of you are thinking, you're out of your mind, Nan. That's okay. It takes all kinds in this world.
Somebody's got to do it.
Right. Well, some people are just, I'm fascinated by it. It's not everything that I, kind of bury myself in. But when I'm using herbal formulas, or when somebody goes out in the industry and says, if you take piperines and add it to curcumin, which in my world, that's a hot formula, right? Black pepper, a lot of heat, kind of damp in heat. Curcumin, hot and dry. You put those together, that's a really hot formula. But what do you get out of it, right? Can it be helpful for people? And the answer is yes. And we don't know the energetics of these people. We know their kind of broad scope of age, but we don't know their energetics. So it was effective. And so that's really good to know. And if you're interested in this for more in-depth information about how clinical trials are constructed, check out this really cool new publication called New England Journal of Medicine Evidence. It's called Evidence, EVIDENCE. It's innovative, original research. They have bold ideas in clinical design, actionable information to inform any of you who are blooding herbalists, or if you're a clinician, or if you're just curious. You'll discover all of this and more in NEGM Evidence. It's a digital journal. It's a peer-reviewed journal, and they look at different ways to construct clinical designs and to get at really important information on how things work. So
that's awesome. Thank you. I'm glad I asked that question.
That was a long answer, wasn't it?
It was a long answer. Yes, it was. Yes, it was. But every once in a while, getting really good, deep information is really helpful.
Well, that's why we called that section a deep dive into naturals, for sure.
Yeah. And I guess I'm going to lead off.
Yes, please.
Right?
Yes, because we're going to tie back to goji berries.
So, yeah, that's exactly right. What I want to talk about today is goji berries. Now, many of the people listening, I'm sure, are familiar with goji berries, and sometimes they get called things like wolfberry. In Chinese herbal tradition, it's called gojitsa. And gojitsa it's a very nutritive and very special berry. It's something that has a very deep place in traditional Chinese herbalism, as far as a longevity tonic, as far as something that it's probably the most revered herb and that's used for vision and for enhancing vision in the Chinese paradigm. So, it's a vine. It grows on a vine. It can be grown here in the United States. It adapts itself very well. And in some areas, I know that in Massachusetts and in New Hampshire and Vermont, there are people that are growing goji berry, as well as people that are growing some other Chinese herbs that come out really nicely, really, really nicely. So it likes cool climate, and it is a vine. Once it gets established, it can become very prolific. So, you want to give it some room to run, because it definitely will do that. And it's considered a tonifying herb. So nowadays that would come under the category probably of an adaptogen, although it's not completely an adaptogen, but it's combined with adaptogens very regularly to enhance activity in one way or another. Now, what's really, really interesting about it is that, in Chinese tradition, they say that if you consume a small handful, 6 to 10 grams of these berries, you'll be happy for the rest of the day. So you get up in the morning, you take some, and you can make a tea out of them, or you can just eat them out of your hand, and you're going to be happy for the rest of the day. Now, they say if you do that every day of your life, you're going to have not only a very long life, but you're going to have a very happy life. Okay, and there are tons of stories around gojitsa in traditional Chinese herbalism, and almost all of them deal with one of two things. One would be longevity. It is really considered to be a longevity herb or a fruit, and the other would be the beauty and the clarity and the tone of your skin, because it's said that it helps you to be very youthful and beautiful looking. So women especially loved gojitsa as an herb to take for their skin and to keep their skin radiant and firm and moist. So one of the other stories that I find really interesting about the gojitsa is a story about the oldest man in China. And it's an interesting legend, and it's at least somewhat verifiable. But this was about a 7-foot tall, if you can believe it, 7-foot tall Chinese herbalist and martial arts instructor who was named Li Qingyuan, and he was reportedly born in 1677. So get that, 1677, and he died in 1933. So
Okay.
he was a teacher. Yeah, he was a teacher, and he was an herbalist, and supposedly, according to the legend, when he was 11 years old, some wandering herbalists came through the village that he was part of, and he became so fascinated by their stories of the herbs and what the herbs that they were studying would do that he just went off with them and wandered all over China and Tibet and Mongolia and all of these different places literally for hundreds of years, like 250 years old. And he was literally, at the end of his life, he was the teacher and herbalist for a general who was the top general for Chiang Kai-shek, who was the generalissimo of the Chinese army and the Chinese Republic before it was taken over by Mao and everything. And so there is some definite, validity to the history. And the reason that I say this is because one of his favorite herbs was gojitsa. It had a very prominent place in his herbal dispensary, if you will. And he took it every day of his life and said that one of the reasons that he had such a good longevity was the gojitsa. Now,
That's a crazy story. I want to believe it.
250 something years old.
But then when you start, when you start bringing up, historical kind of reference. What's the matter with me this morning? Historical reference. I think to myself, is it possible that he really didn't live that long?
Well, there's a lot of substantiation, and the Chinese have, substantiated quite a bit of it too. So at least they've substantiated that he lived probably at least 198 years.
Wow.
So that's quite amazing.
I'm not sure I want to live that long, but
no,
okay.
exactly. Evidently, he went through like 13 to 20 wives or something like that in that period of time. So, you got to consider that too.
Not sure I would want to do that either.
Right. So now, other uses. There's some other really fascinating uses. So they had clinical trials where they gave people who were overweight 30 grams of the berries to boil into a tea and then drink that tea twice a day. And all of the people in the study actually lost quite a bit of weight. So it was very good for weight control of weight. They also have combined it with another herb, a Chinese scutellaria, which is another beautiful herb. And they took 30 grams of the gojitsa, or the goji berry, and the scutellaria, 30 grams of the scutellaria, it was 50 grams of the goji and 30 grams of the scutellaria. And they combined those in a tea and drank it for morning sickness in the first trimester. And it worked extremely well for the women who were taking it there. And then no hairy babies, so that worked out well too. It's also an herb that's really, really great as a hepatoprotective herb. It's really protective of the liver. It's very helpful for balancing blood sugar, and of course, like I said, it's absolutely revered for its ability to give you youthful, beautiful skin. So, and I love the taste. I mix them in my oatmeal. I'll enjoy them as a snack right out of hand. You just want to make sure that you get the really nice, plump, red, soft, luscious berries. You don't want to get the old dried stuff that you feel like you're chewing on little bits of wood.
I use them. I take organic puffed rice and raw honey and mulberries and gojitsa, and I make like a natural Rice Krispie snack. Oh,
there you go.
Crazy good. My brother goes
they're
crazy for those.
They're absolutely delicious.
Yeah, so good.
And if you get good goji berries, they're very fun to eat. They're delicious.
They're good.
So that's my favorite herb for the day.
Yeah, so it's a good one. Okay, so my favorite thing for our episode number 5 is the amino acid cysteine, or N-Acetyl-Cysteine. It truly is a favorite of mine. It's in my personal everyday, and I often will recommend it to some of my clients. Acetyl-cysteine is the N-acetyl derivative of the amino acid cysteine, L-cysteine, which it's found in a lot of food, and we're going to talk about that in a second. It's a precursor in the formation of the very, very critical antioxidant that's made in your liver called glutathione. Glutathione your body uses up really rapidly, and anything that we have in our diet that can help produce glutathione is very, very important for detoxification. And acetylcysteine, we call it NAC, N-A-C, NAC for short. It's used in both nutritional supplements as well as in hospital and clinical settings. In hospitals, it's been used for acetaminophen overdose and to loosen thick mucus in individuals with chronic bronchopulmonary issues like pneumonia and bronchitis. It's used as a dietary supplement in tablet or capsule form. In 1997, research in 1997, and then again in 2009, NAC was found to reduce the incidence and severity of the common flu in human clinical trials, and those were very well constructed trials. So I like to start off with food always, and again, amino acids, not sexy, although NAC it has that thing about it. It's it probably has to be next to lysine, the most famous amino acid in use. But I will say that all amino acids are really, generally recognized as safe. So foods that are rich in in cysteine are the following. So number one on the list is pork chops. And I haven't had a pork chop since my mom made them when I was a kid, and I fed most of it to the dog under the table because I'm not a fan. But 6 ounces of pork chop has 595 milligrams in a 6-ounce chop. That's a lot of cysteine. Number 2 is beef skirt steak. It has 580 milligrams per 6-ounce steak. Number 3 is lean chicken breast, and that has 571 milligrams per 6 ounces of meat. Number 4 in the lineup is tuna with 546 milligrams per 6 ounces of that fish. Number 5 is, yay, finally a vegetarian source, lentils, which are big in India, with 235 milligrams per cup. So we go from 550 all the way down to 200, lower than 250. So big leap there between animal protein and vegetarian, but still quite a bit, 235 per cup. And a cup of lentils is a good serving, you know. Mm-hmm. Number 6 on the lineup is oatmeal. Yay, oatmeal with 200.
I love with goji berries.
With the goji berries, absolutely, with 227 milligrams per cup. Number 7 is eggs. 1 egg equals 146 milligrams. Most people have 2, so double that. That's a lot of cysteine. Mm-hmm. And then number 8 is sunflower seeds, about 165 milligrams per ounce. So that's a big, handful. Number 9 is low-fat yogurt. That's 127 milligrams per ounce. And number 10, the last of the top 10, is Swiss cheese or hard cheeses at 112 milligrams per ounce. So that's where you can get it in food. Research, double-blind placebo-controlled trial of 262 patients has shown that NAC treatment was well tolerated and resulted in a significant decrease in the frequency of influenza-like episodes, severity, and length of time confined to bed. Small studies have shown acetylcysteine to be a benefit to people with eyelid inflammation and dry eyes. Acetylcysteine or N-Acetyl-Cysteine was initially patented in 1960. Now, it was discovered much earlier because a lot of the amino acids were discovered much earlier. And they were already being isolated and used for amino acid therapy, which was very popular in the 40s and 50s. But in 1960s, it came into medical use. And in 1968, it became the World Health Organization's list of absolute essential medicines. So every hospital and every clinic, right? So forms of NAC, just so you know. Solution for inhalation or mucolytic therapy, prescription only. You can't get that as a supplement. Intravenous injection for acetaminophen overdose, prescription only. Nebulized as an inhaled vapor for pulmonary issues, prescription only. Oral solutions, effervescent tablets, capsules, and eye solutions, ocular solutions, eye drops, usually supplementation. Organs, it's been studied to support both in vitro animal and, in some cases, human clinical. Liver, lungs, kidney, brain, cardiovascular system. Gosh, it goes everywhere, right? Adverse effects. There are adverse effects for oral administration of N-Acetyl-Cysteine. There has been reports of anything over 500 milligrams per serving, little nausea, vomiting. Sometimes people get rashes from it. And sometimes people at much higher doses get feverishness. Now, we do see negative side effects for, suggested servings that are used way over 3 grams, and some studies have actually been done on 20 grams to see where that goes. Nobody's died from it, but you can be pretty nauseous and vomit, and so again, even a good thing can become a bad thing if you overdo it. So it's a supplement that's received GRAS status between 100 and 500 milligrams per serving per day. There is currently controversy with this amino acid, and we covered that with Dr. Daniel Fabricant in our 3rd episode. So if you haven't listened to that particular podcast, please find some time and do so. Dr. Fabricant was amazing, and he will be back with us on a near future episode to report on how it's going in Washington with the FDA regarding that supplemental use of NAC after being removed from Amazon and the general public because of a patent for the hospital and medical use of NAC. So that's where the confusion lies, and there's a lot of there are people in Washington. Dr. Daniel Fabricant is one of the leaders there trying to help make sure we don't lose it as a supplement in smaller serving sizes. So, so that's where we are with NAC and N-Acetyl-Cysteine, a favorite thing of mine for sure.
Nan, that was fabulous. That's, like I said, NAC is one of my favorites as well. I was very upset when I heard that it was that the FDA was trying to pull it off the shelves. And it's one of the reasons why we did have Daniel back on the show and why we want to bring him back again. He's such a great champion for this industry and for what we stand for. So, folks, I'm, pretty sure that especially if you've tuned in new and you're wondering, who the heck are these two goofballs and, why should we listen to them? Well, let's give you just a little bit of a background real quick. Nan's had a complementary and an alternative health and herbal clinic for over 32 years. And she focuses on really difficult to treat conditions and has been a spokesperson and an educator for some of the most well-known companies in this industry for over 27 years. I've worked with her personally for over 10 years, and it's just a pleasure to be with this young woman who's just so well versed.
I'm not that young anymore, Tom.
Well, comparatively speaking.
That's funny. Tom's herbal background goes back to 1970 in Hawaii, where he was an organic farmer and worked with local doctors and it's so cool. I love this. The stories he tells about this is really mind-bending. He worked with doctors really closely, making fresh organic juices per the doctor's recommendations, and those were given to their patients. So each juice that he put together was literally prescriptive by the physician, and then he would deliver it fresh to these people, and they were really sick. These people were really sick. So he had a huge part to play in a lot of people getting well. And since then, it came back to the mainland. In the past 30 years, he's worked for two very large and well-known companies as their herbal educator and trainer. But as you can tell during these podcasts, he has such a visceral experience of herbalism. I mean, not only does he know how to employ the herb, but he knows them intimately. He grows them in his backyard in pots, and he's grown them for just decades and decades. So he has these incredible relationships with the herbs, which is it's just truly a treasure trove of herbal information. So I'm always so grateful when he tells the stories of how he,
250-year-old herbalist.
True story. So now you know who we are. And we'll be doing this podcast twice a month, interviewing key people, thought leaders in the natural products industry. We're going to be doing a deep dive every once in a while when, people's schedules just don't jive, and we're moving on to our next episode. So, and if you wouldn't mind, folks, just like our Facebook page or, share our podcast with interested friends and family, or put it on LinkedIn or wherever you want to put it. And let us know too, if there's something you want to hear about, you want us to do some deep dives on it, please go ahead and, make a little, mention, or, look us up on LinkedIn or look us up on Facebook, and, just go ahead and give us a shout out to what you want to hear about. And in addition to all that fun, we know how crazy we are in the natural food industry and how different we are from the mass markets. We are definitely the land of the fruits and nuts, as my dad used to say, lovingly, literally. But we do have a good time, and we know how to laugh at ourselves, too. It's part of being healthy and happy.
And taking goji berries.
That's true, right? So, Tom, do you want to tell people about our new segment that we're
Right.
thinking
Well,
of?
the thing is that we're always sort of, brainstorming. What can we do to make this more interesting, or what can we do to make this more inclusive of people in our industry? Because literally, we've dedicated our lives. I mean, literally, I started doing organic farming in Hawaii when I was 20, and that was 53 years ago. So that's, more than half a decade. Way more than half a decade, but it's basically more than half a century being involved in something that I love dearly. And so one of the things that Nan and I have really enjoyed in different iterations of what we do for this industry is when we've gone out and talked to retailers, when we've gone out and visited them in their stores, when we've talked to their staff, and they've always been so kind and generous to us. And some of the stories that they have told us.
They're side benders.
Yeah, so we have a new segment that we're going to start doing every once in a while, if we can get the feedback that we want, called Calling All Natural Food Retailers. And basically, it's just a concept. We would like to have, retail store owners contact us.
We're calling all of you, but it's called Natural Customers Say the Darndest Things. That's what we're going to name it. So, but we're calling all of you.
Yeah, we're calling all of you, and basically we're going to call it Natural Food Customers Say the Darndest Things. Just like kids say the darndest things, well, so do natural food customers say the darndest things. And what we'd like to do, if you have a funny story or an anecdote about somebody who's been in your store who has said something really funny, I remember a really good friend who's passed on since, but he used to work in a health food store, and he relayed to me one time that, well, a little old lady came in and she was like, I'm looking for a supplement. Do you have, what's it called? Oh, and he said, ginkgo? And she goes, that's it. So, little funny stories like that. Keep them clean, keep them PC, broadcast PC, and keep it brief. But we would love to air it, and we will give your store credit. We'll give you, name you, your store, and the city that you're in as a thank you to let us use your anecdote on the show. So there you have it.
Yeah, and contact us either via email or through social media, and we'll read the stories. We know what it's like for all of you out there in the natural products industry, and people come in and do funny things and say funny things, and it's great.
Is the best medicine.
It is the best medicine, and it's wonderful and human, and it's a part of how we do what we do. So we really want to share those stories.
Part of why we cherish what we do.
And with that, we'll say...
Well, Nan, I wasn't going to share this, but, since we share everything, I just have to tell you, I'm really bummed.
Why?
I had to fire my dermatologist yesterday.
Oh.
Yeah, I was going to this guy for some skin conditions, and I finally had to fire him because he was making too many rash decisions.
Wah, wah.
And with that, we'll say goodnight, Gracie.
All right, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you on our next episode in a couple of weeks. Take good care. Hey, everyone. Until next time, I'm Nan.
And I'm Tom.
And we'll have more great topics and guests in the very near future. So join us right here in 2 weeks as the Supplement Super Sleuth
And the Herbal Storyteller take another deep dive into the fascinating world of the natural products industry.
See you later.